Welcome into another episode of Locked On Phillies. And in today's episode, we're breaking down Brandon Marsh's 2024 season and discussing who this guy really is as a Major League Baseball player.
You are Locked On Phillies, your daily Philadelphia Phillies podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Yes, this is Locked On Phillies, and I'm your host, Connor Thomas. Thank you so much for joining us today. We're part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. You may know me from some of my other work in the sports talk space here in Philadelphia. I've been on the radio doing sports talk in 97.5 The Fanatic for 5 years here in Philly. I've been a credentialed Philadelphia Phillies media member for 3 years, and this is my third season as the host of Locked On Phillies. Please make sure you're rating and reviewing, hitting that subscribe button on the YouTube for new notifications when episodes are posted. Appreciate everyone who's done that already and everyone who's going to. Today's episode is brought to you by GameTime. Download the GameTime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONMLB, and you'll get $20 off your first purchase. So go ahead and check out our friends over at GameTime. Today, we're evaluating Brandon Marsh's 2024 season. So we're going to start with the overall evaluation. Then we're going to get into a discussion about whether or not he's a true Major League caliber hitter, because the jury might still be out on that, folks. He had some rough appearances at the plate, to put it lightly, in 2024. And the final thing we're going to get into is whether or not he's going to be on this team next year. There are very minimal spots where the Phillies can make changes. I do think left field could be one of those spots. But does that mean Marsh is no longer a Philly? Well, we'll get into that. But let's start with his 2024 season. We always start by the numbers. So Brandon Marsh had a really weird year. He batted .249. He had 16 homers. It's not too far off from the numbers that Bryson Stott put up at second base. The problem is you don't look at Brandon Marsh as that type of a hitter, and he struck out so much more than what Stott put together, which is why the average is below 250. He had a 3.1 WAR, which is a strong mark in 2024, and a lot of that came from early on in the season. Here's where the story really gets weird for Brandon Marsh, right? 17 doubles, 16 home runs, 3 triples. The power number's not crazy. You wouldn't expect him to be. He's not a true power hitter. He has a little bit of pop, but 60 RBIs. That's the exact same number as he had in 2023, so that's on the mark. He had 4 more home runs. He had less doubles. He had less triples. So I don't really – it's hard to tell there. He had 9 less walks, so that's not a crazy amount of difference. He had 4 more plate appearances. So the numbers carried over pretty well, but the batting average went from 277 to 249. Why is that? Well, because he struck out 10 more times. And he had already struck out 144 times in 2023. 154 strikeouts for a guy like Brandon Marsh, who is not giving you plus power at the plate. That is absolutely unacceptable. That cannot happen for Brandon Marsh. He was a strikeout machine down the stretch. And that's just you can't be that guy. Unless you're a Kyle Schwarber, unless you're a Bryce Harper type of power hitter, you can't be a 150 strikeout guy at the major league level and expect to be a plus part of a team. That was the biggest problem with Marsh. Now, I'm going to give a little bit of color to this if you are willing to open your mind to the mentality of a player. I know this is something that drives people crazy when you have to look at it well, here's the reason why he potentially wasn't put in the best spot to succeed. And it's no fault of the Phillies organization. It's the reality of baseball. We have talked about this. Remember Whit Merrifield, our old friend? It feels like forever ago that he was on this team. But Whit Merrifield, I think, was put in a tough spot coming here, used to being a starter, used to being one of the guys. And then at this point in his career, he picked a role as a guy who was going to be utility, he was going to be a backup, he was going to be all over the place, not a consistent playing time setup. And I think that really was tough for him because when you start struggling, you're not playing every day, it's harder to build momentum. Brandon Marsh was kind of in that spot this year with all the stuff that changed around with the outfield. Now, he had a bit of a hamstring injury at a point in the season, so that definitely doesn't help. But it was minimal. He didn't miss a significant amount of time. But there was not quite a platoon, but him and Yohan Rojas were going back and forth. And then Austin Hayes comes in post-trade deadline. And though Austin Hayes was hurt, he would go out there a little bit. Remember, we had our guy, David Dahl was out there a little bit, working on some stuff. You saw Weston Wilson here and there. It wasn't Brandon Marsh is our starter in left field. This is our guy. It was very much hey, he gets righties and sometimes lefties, but we don't like him against lefties. So he didn't get just put out there and say, like, you know how Nick Castellanos was handled, and we'll talk about Nick Castellanos in the coming episodes when we do his evaluation. Nick Castellanos struggled, and Rob Thompson said, bro, that's our guy in right field. We're going to go stick him out there. He's a veteran player. He's been an all-star before. We're going to go give him the opportunity to work out of this. Guess what? He worked out of it. Now, I'm not saying Brandon Marsh should have been afforded that opportunity. Now, personally, I think that he should have, considering where the outfield was for this team for a lot of the year. But what I'm saying is it's hard for a player who doesn't know they're playing every day to mentally be in the perfect spot. Now, that's not an excuse. That doesn't mean you can strike out 154 times as a non-power hitter and have someone look at your season and say, he was great this year. Like, no, I'm not going to say, Brandon Marsh was given a raw deal. I'm just saying that I think that there is a better version of Brandon Marsh that could come out if he got everyday playing time. But it's a double-edged sword, right? Or a Sophie's choice, or one of those expressions, because to get more playing time, you have to earn more playing time. To earn more playing time, you have to play well in the time that you have. And there were points where Brandon Marsh didn't do that this year. Now, there was a stretch ahead of the All-Star break, early on in the season. It's like April, May, and the start of June, where Brandon Marsh was flat out unbelievable. He was one of the best hitters on this team. He was red hot. And then he went ice cold for pretty much the rest of the year. And didn't give you too much in the postseason. And at the plate, the guy was a negative asset for the Philadelphia Phillies for the large majority of this year. That's just calling a spade a spade. That's exactly what you should evaluate Brandon Marsh's 2024 season as. I don't know how you could see it any other way. And I'm a guy that's hugely pro Marsh. I think this guy is a true, solid major league starter in the outfield. I do. Now, on the other hand, we do have to talk about the fielding, where he is a Gold Glove nominee in left field this year. And that's something that I've been fighting for that for really since the Phillies traded for him. Look at this guy play the outfield. And I mean, as a guy who played the outfield a lot growing up, not that I'm not saying I'm a major league outfielder, but I was pretty darn good back in the day when I played coming up, playing in showcases and stuff like that. I think I have a pretty good eye for guys that have the look of outfielders that are plus defenders. And Brandon Marsh has that look. He gets the balls other guys don't get to. He makes some great plays. He makes some aggressive routes to balls that makes him look dumb out there. And it can make you think, this guy, he's taking too many chances. But ultimately, Rawlings told you what they think of you. This dude is a Gold Glove nominee caliber left fielder. I think at his best point in his career, he could be a Gold Glove outfielder. And that can't go by the wayside, folks. Whether you believe in the nomination or not, he's got it. And that's the type of reputation he's going to now carry. And I don't think he'll win it out there in left field. I don't think he'll come home with the hardware. But being in the top 3 left fielders defensively in the National League is something that he can hang his hat on. And that's a good thing. That goes into the evaluation. This is not just reviewing Brandon Marsh's 2024 as a hitter. This is reviewing Brandon Marsh's 2024. So I got to give him credit for that. And it leads to a very interesting evaluation of like, wow, he was exceptional at the start of the year. And then down the stretch, or for the last 2-3 months of the season, he was near unplayable with the way he was swinging the bat and the approaches he had at the plate. So how do you even break that down? It's tough. And can you have a guy in the lineup when you have World Series expectations that could be a complete auto out for months at a time? That's a conversation we'll have later on in the episode, and I'll dive into my thoughts on that and whether or not he's got a future here with the Philadelphia Phillies, even into 2025, even as soon as this next season. But I'm going to be as fair as I possibly can to Brandon Marsh. The other thing you have to consider are the expectations. I think sometimes when we see a World Series team, right, or a World Series caliber team, and the Philadelphia Phillies, they're putting together World Series caliber rosters every year, you lump every player on the team into that expectation. World Series team, that means this guy who plays on that World Series team is a World Series player. And that's not always how it works. There are guys on every World Series team, not that stink, maybe some, but there are just average to even below average baseball players on every team. I guarantee you, you can look at the Dodgers and find somebody that's a below average hitter and a below average fielder. And the reason they're winning are the Shohei Ohtanis and Freddie Freemans and Mookie Betts of the world. But it's not, you don't see like, oh, we're trying to win the World Series, so Brandon Marsh has to be a World Series left fielder. No, it's the strength of the team. And I think that gives an unfair expectation for some of these guys. So by expectation, Brandon Marsh was worse this year than I thought he was going to be. I'm going to give him a C minus for that. I think he was below what I expected him to be and what the team expected him to be. And that's why we're going to have some of the conversations that we have coming up the rest of the episode. Anyone who puts him like down in the D's, I think that's ignoring the defense. I think that's ignoring the starts of the season. I think that's ignoring some of the good that Brandon Marsh gave you. That's ignoring the 3.1 WAR or whatever he had. Like, not a WAR, like, it's not my Bible, wins above replacement, but I do take it into account when I look at this, that you generate those stats by doing productive things. All of that leads to a C minus season. You got to be better, but he wasn't absolutely god awful, terrible. Get this guy off the team. Now, could they move on from him? We'll have that conversation. His evaluation compared to the average left fielder in baseball, I'm going to bump him up just like a little smidge of a letter grade. I'm going to make him C. I think he was a league average left fielder. He was below average offensively. He was above average defensively. We're going to even that out to C. Because I think at his best, Brandon Marsh is an above average player. That's why average is below average by his standards. Does that make sense? So that's my evaluation of Brandon Marsh's 2024 season. Now, the thing we're going to get into next is this guy truly a major league hitter? Like, is there a world where he can come out of this and say, oh, okay, I'm a average to above average part of a lineup? Well, I'll tell you my thoughts coming up as we continue today's episode. Let's talk about Prize Picks first, though, because Prize Picks is the best place to get real money sports action. With over 10 million members and billions of dollars in awarded winnings, Prize Picks has made daily fantasy sports accessible to all. You just pick more or less on at least 2 players for a shot to win up to 100 times your cash. So the Sixers are on the floor tonight. Joel Embiid and Paul George aren't playing. Look at Tyrese Maxey and say, okay, I think he's going to have a good night. Look at Andre Drummond, who's going to be playing center in place of Joel Embiid like he's been doing all year. He's a rebound machine. So if you take more on Tyrese Maxey's points and more on Andre Drummond's rebounds, that's all you've got to do to win up to 100 times your cash. You got to go ahead and check it out with Prize Picks. It's really that simple. You can add more to your lineup. It's really, it takes like 60 seconds. You just pick the player and the stat and more or less. Anybody can do it. If I can do it, you can do it. I'm no genius over here. And there are great promotions all the time on Prize Picks. They do all these special things. Maybe you want to play Prize Picks alongside Drewski or Joe Budden or MMA champ Sean O'Malley. Well, you can do that with community plays under the promos tab and check that out. It's a very cool thing. Prize Picks has all this great stuff. And also, they're going to cut you a deal. You download the app today and use code LOCKEDONMLB. You get $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. Again, download the app today and use code LOCKEDONMLB to get $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. Prize Picks. Run your game. All right, this conversation is more theory than anything. I'm not really going to look at the numbers. I'm not really going to look at the strikeouts. I'm going to talk about what I see when I see Brandon Marsh put together at bats, right? And the numbers go into this, but it's more of an evaluation on feel because I'm not working with the guy. I don't know like the mental makeup. I don't know the stuff that he goes through with Kevin Long when he talks to the hitting coach and says, hey man, this is what I'm struggling with. This is what's trouble for me. Here's why I'm striking out all these times. This is what I'm seeing. I'm not going to presume to be inside the mind of Brandon Marsh, but this is a very important question because when you see players, younger players, that you look at and you have to determine, are they a long-term fit for this organization? One of the things you have to look at is this guy, like, where's his ceiling as a hitter? And for Brandon Marsh, a lot of people don't think right now, and when I say a lot of people, I'm talking about the fan base. I'm talking about critics. I'm talking about media members. I'm talking about the voices that you hear outside of the Phillies organization. The organization will tell you with their moves this offseason whether or not they believe this. But the question is this guy a major league hitter? Is he a guy that truly at the major league level is going to be league average, right? To me, what's league average? 265 batting average would be fine right now. 260 to 265 is kind of what I'm looking for. Can you do that with a little bit of pop, 10 to 15 home runs? That would be good enough from Brandon Marsh. And you got to cut down on the strikeouts. There's more to go into it, but it's not so much about where the numbers are, it's where they could be. Does that feel like an impossible spot for him to reach? And to me, it doesn't feel impossible at all. To me, it feels probable. I see Brandon Marsh, and I see a guy that was with an organization in the Los Angeles Angels that, frankly, I don't have a lot of respect for. Sorry to the Angels, but that team They had Shohei Ohtani and Mike Trout, and they couldn't win. And I know you've heard that narrative a billion times. So there are organizations in baseball that just find ways to make players worse, find ways to make their team underperform, find ways to come up short of expectations. And the Los Angeles Angels, for a long time now, have been one of those teams. Brandon Marsh is 26 years old. Remember, we talk about Alec Boehm as a young player. Alec Boehm's 28. Now, Brandon Marsh is going to turn 27 before the start of the 2025 season. So let's just call him 27, not to age him. I know I just turned 30. You don't want to give years away, but he'll understand. Let's call him a 27-year-old player. I told you the prime is like 28 to 32. He's not there yet. Now he's getting up on it, but do I think that there could be more in a 27-year-old player that we've seen put together months that are all-star caliber and back-to-back months that are all-star caliber? I absolutely think so. The upside with Brandon Marsh is there. I don't think we realize how many players around baseball don't have those months. Like it goes back to the World Series expectations conversation where you say, okay, well, we've got to win 90 plus games this year. And that means a lot of games matter. And that means any loss is going to annoy us. And the expectations are so high. And you look at that and you say, okay, well, I'm going to get significantly more upset with this team when they don't play high level baseball. But what I don't think we realize when we see Brandon Marsh striking out all these times is we don't think about the months where he's a monster for this team and one of the better hitters on this team and say, well, there are some guys in baseball that their entire season is much more like what Brandon Marsh did the past couple of months. There are plenty of worse baseball players than Brandon Marsh at the major league level. And we lose sight of there are guys that stink relative to major league players. Obviously, none of these guys stink, but stink relative to your average major league baseball player that play on teams. Go and look at the White Sox aren't a great example because that whole team is basically not major leaguers. But look at like the Rockies, look at the Marlins, teams like that are bottom feeder teams from this past season, and say, wow, oh, that guy's worse, and that guy's worse, and that guy's worse. I think the problem with Brandon Marsh, and part of it might have come with the acquisition, right? You trade Logan O'Hoppe to get him in here, and he comes in, and you see Logan O'Hoppe as a top catching prospect who's now a solid player out there for the Angels. And part of looking at what you gave up might make people think, okay, well, Brandon Marsh has to be that caliber of player. Part of it is you gave up a little bit of talent in Logan O'Hoppe for better fit with Brandon Marsh at a position where you could play him. So I'm not going to relitigate the trade, but I do think part of the way he entered the city ahead of that, or at the trade deadline 2 years ago, is a way that people will define him as he has to reach this pinnacle compared to Logan O'Hoppe. I don't know that that's fair. I'm just talking about the individual player in a vacuum. Can Brandon Marsh be a major league hitter? The guy does put together solid at-bats at points. And when he's hot, he's hot. You know what Brandon Marsh reminds me of, funny enough? He reminds me of Nick Castellanos light. His whole low and away slider is the high fastball. Like you throw him high cheese and he's just going to swing at it every time. He's going to swing through it every time. And it seems a little bit more competitive because it's a more competitive looking swing. Like when Nick Castellanos swings at that low and away slider, he's like falling over himself to do it. When Brandon Marsh swings at the high fastball, because it's just a different type of swing to get to that pitch, it looks more like a competitive swing. He's just missing the ball, but rest assured, that's trouble for him. And maybe that's him trying to create power. Maybe that's not recognizing pitches as well as he could at the plate. Maybe it's just a weak spot in the swing. Whatever the case may be, he feels like a Nick Castellanos light to me. And that is problematic if you don't create the power that Nick Castellanos creates when he's going good. But he does have those like heat check months or heat check weeks where when he's going good, he's amazing. And when he's not going good, well, he gives you pretty much nothing. And can you survive with a Nick Castellanos-like player? Absolutely. Can you survive with two of them? Well, that's more of a conversation for what we have coming up next. But that's part of the reason why I think he's a true he will be a major league hitter. Because when I see him have these hot stretches, when I see him go through months where he's tearing the cover off the ball, I say there are a lot of guys that in their career maybe have 1 month like that. Maybe have 2 months like that. And Brandon Marsh has 1 or 2 of them every year, at least with the Phillies, what we've seen since he's been here. Small sample size still, a couple of years only, but I've seen moments from him where I'm like, okay, this guy can swing it. This guy can play. This guy can be a solid option in left field. Like think back to the postseason last year when he was arguably your best hitter in the NLCS when the whole rest of the team was slumping. Case in point, right? If he's rolling at the right time of the year, he can be an asset. So to me, that's not like your prototypical, this guy's a major league hitter. But if I see him do it for an extended period of time, multiple seasons, and a month I would count as an extended period of time, I believe that guy's in there somewhere. It doesn't mean he's going to realize that. He's going to have to work to become more consistent, and he's going to have to take out some of the holes in his swing. But is Brandon Marsh a true major league hitter? I absolutely 100% believe that he is at some point in his career. If not now, at some point in his career, he will be a true major league hitter. He's not one of these lost cause, this guy can't hit at this level. So that should give you a little bit of confidence, if you believe in my evaluation of the player, that there's something better coming from Brandon Marsh, and there is upside to keeping him with the team. But again, I told you, the organization may not see things the way that I see them. So when you look at that, well, how do we find out how the organization feels about Brandon Marsh? We're going to find out this offseason with the answer to a very simple question. Is he on the team next year? We'll discuss coming up as we wrap up today's episode. Let's talk about GameTime first, though, because GameTime is an authorized ticket marketplace of Major League Baseball, which makes getting tickets faster and easier. Prices on the GameTime app, they actually go down the closer it gets to the first pitch. They got killer last-minute deals, all-in prices, views from your seat, and their lowest price guarantee. GameTime takes the guesswork out of buying MLB tickets. And there may only be one Major League Baseball game left this year, as the Dodgers are on the brink of winning the World Series. But GameTime doesn't just do baseball. They do football. They do hockey. They do basketball. They do college football. They do concerts, comedy, theater, all this great stuff that you might need a ticket and a seat to go to. GameTime's the place to get it. And why is GameTime the place to get it? Well, it's because the way they go about their business. First of all, they have great deals. They have GameTime picks that curates special options for you that fit your needs better, so you're not looking at like $10,000 tickets or anything like that. They know what you're looking for. They have flash deals and zone deals where you can find special deals on games or events. You can find special seat deals and stuff like that. They have all kinds of different options for you to find the best possible pricing. They also have all-in pricing. So you toggle that on and you're going to see the fees up front. You don't have to worry about like getting backdoored by anything when you go to the checkout screen. They have seat views, so you can get a panoramic view from your seat in the app before you buy. And they have the lowest price guarantee. The GameTime guarantee, they're going to credit you 110% of the difference if you find seats in the same row and section for less. What more could you want? Well, they also have some of the best ticket coverage in the business. So take the guesswork out of buying MLB tickets or any kind of tickets and more with GameTime picks. Download the GameTime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONMLB, and you'll get $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONMLB. You'll get $20 off. Download GameTime today. Last-minute tickets, lowest price, guaranteed with GameTime. This is going to be a very interesting offseason for the Philadelphia Phillies organization because Dave Dombrowski is going to have to work in the margins. We've talked about this multiple times this offseason already. This is going to continue to be a narrative throughout these next couple months of episodes. You're going to hear me talk about this a lot. Working in the margins, because you're not going to add another star player, most likely, unless they want to go get Juan Soto, which, hey, I'm cool with that, Dave. You want to go get Juan Soto? You're not going to hear me complain. But more likely than not, it's going to be who are the fringe role players that we can change their role, or we can bring in somebody else to try and shake up the dynamic of this team. How's that going to work? And how do you do that without majorly compromising a locker room that's been really good and a team that won 95 games and all of this stuff that you expect the Philadelphia Phillies to do year in and year out now that they've accomplished it this past year? You don't want to take a step back by retooling things that you don't have to, right? Sometimes, you know this, if you're someone who's like a handy person who works on things, let's say your clock breaks and you want to tinker with the gears. Sometimes you fix it. Sometimes you make a change and you're like, wow, this situation just got worse. I wish I would have just left it the way it was. That's how fixing things works. And that's the tough thing that Dave Dombrowski is going to have to work through this year, is how much of the Phillies roster is okay. So the question now is left field okay? Now, acquiring Austin Hayes at the trade deadline told you a lot about how this organization was looking at Brandon Marsh. They saw a need in left field. They brought in a player that could hit lefties in Austin Hayes because Brandon Marsh is a left-handed hitter that had trouble against lefties and has had trouble historically against lefties. And they brought him in, and basically it seemed that he was going to be the everyday starter in left field if the injury problems didn't happen, and Rojas and Marsh were going to split time in center. Now, you look at center field, and we'll evaluate Yohan Rojas on tomorrow's episode. That's another one where question is, all these same questions kind of exist for Brandon Marsh and Johan Rojas in tandem. If they make a change with Rojas, does that mean that maybe they move Marsh to center? Sure. So it's not just, is Brandon Marsh a starting left fielder or else he's off the team? Could they move on from Austin Hayes, who has less time here with the organization? I know they acquired, but they could say, well, we like Marsh better. He's a younger player. You stick him out there in left field. You move on from Hayes. You bring in someone in center, or do you move Marsh as an outfield depth option? Do you bring in a higher caliber left fielder? There's all of these different things that the organization could do. Now, with optionality comes danger for the player. There's not that many options at third base. We talked about Alec Boehm. I told you, I think he's here. I think it would be crazy to move on from him. We talked about second base and Bryson Stott. There's no other real options with the organization. I don't think that you're moving on from a young player like Bryson Stott just because. Could you find a better option? Sure, but they probably won't be available and they'll probably be expensive. So those guys, there's not a lot of optionality at second base or third base. There's a lot in left field. You could change positions. You could change roles. You could change players. You could go ahead and acquire a left fielder, I think, in free agency that is better today than Brandon Marsh. So is the goal to take advantage of Brandon Marsh's potential upside that he's shown and defensive prowess that he's clearly demonstrated and say, well, we got a lot of money out on some other guys. Is this a spot where we can pay less and hopefully get more? Or are they over Brandon Marsh to the point where they can say, it wouldn't be hard to upgrade in the moment? Maybe Brandon Marsh turns into a really good player one day down the line and we say, man, I wish we would have kept that guy, but for the time being, we need a more proven veteran player. I don't think there's any position other than center field and left field that it has a better chance of that coming into play for the Philadelphia Phillies over this offseason. It makes the most sense that either left field or center field are going to be spots that you change. You could talk about right field, but one, Nick Castellanos was arguably your best player for the final 2 months of the season. And also he's a guy that there's a lot of money on that contract. It would be hard to offload that contract. It becomes significantly more difficult than moving a guy like Marsh or moving a guy like Rojas, young players under team control that other franchises would be interested in acquiring. That's it, right? Basically, when you look at a lot of the fan base saying, well, changes have to be made. They got to be. You can't just run it back. You can't play the same team over again that just had a collapse like that in the NLDS, right? Then you look at the spots, and JT's not going anywhere. Bryce ain't going anywhere. Bryson Stott ain't going anywhere. Trey Turner's not. Alec Boehm's not. Castellanos probably isn't because of the contract. Could Marsh? Yes. Could Rojas? Yes. If you're making changes for change's sake, those are the positions you're going to do it. So what are the chances that Brandon Marsh is a Philadelphia Philly next year? Right now, it feels like 60-40 in favor of him still being with the team. It was flooring to me, by the way. Let me not go through this segment without saying, Dave Dombrowski said that Brandon Marsh is in their plans, right? Now, could that be president of baseball operations speak? Could that be front office misdirection where you say, oh, we really like the player, so that when people call you, you can up the price on him? Certainly could be. I don't know. Things change day to day in front offices and professional sports. So I'm not saying, well, Dave Dombrowski said he's in the plans. He's guaranteed to be here. It was interesting he said that, which seems to point more that center field is going to be the spot that they try and make a change. And I can understand that as well, with Johan Rojas seemingly not having much upside at the plate, right? We'll talk about that when we evaluate Rojas. That's a conversation for center field day, which again will be tomorrow. But Dave Dombrowski has said Brandon Marsh is in their plans going forward. I am kind of doubting that that is reality. And if a call comes in on Brandon Marsh, they're absolutely going to pick up the phone. But I think it's a 60% chance he's a Philly next year, a 40% chance he's not, which is still a lot of variability. And that's something that probably doesn't sit well with Marsh as he wonders what the future holds for him. But that's reality of having a down season for a team that is needing to make changes with a lot of other guys locked in the spots. Again, I'm a big Brandon Marsh guy. Do I hope he's on this team next year? Sure. I would like to have him back as a member of the Philadelphia Phillies. But do I understand the downsides that annoy people with the player? Of course. I also see the upsides, which is something that we can't lose in this conversation. That's all for today's episode of Locked On Phillies. So thank you again for joining us. We are, I'll remind you, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Please make sure, I'll ask you again, to rate and review where you consume this in podcast form. Subscribe on the YouTube. If you haven't watched us on YouTube, watch it. You'll see how good the product is when you get to actually see my expressions and motions and everything like that. It gives it a more personal feel. If you like that, hit that subscribe button. It helps me out, puts a little more jingle in my pocket. If you like the content, it's the number one way to say thank you. Tomorrow, the Johan Rojas evaluation, so we'll get into that. And I will talk to you on the next episode of Locked On Phillies.